Well, well, well. My goodness. Someone is actually listening to this. Amazing. Troy clearly has some great powers of attraction. Before I let you go, I would just like to say that this was my first time doing something of this nature. As a result, I am a little rambly, and some of my points could do with some further clarity. Which, dear listener, is where you come in. If you wish for me to expand on a point, or you have a point of your own, I invite you to leave a comment down below, or shoot me a PM to give me the opportunity to explain myself. Now that I've covered my backside, please enjoy. And hello, wary internet traveller. You're probably wondering where you are and, most importantly, who the hell am I? Well, to answer that later question, my name is Q. I have started this YouTube channel hoping to get a bit of fame and a bit of fortune and most likely infamousy. And joining me today is the very wonderful, informative, and witty, and not to mention handsome, Mr. Leavitt. Care to introduce yourself?
Wow. Handsome, you said.
Smooth,
right,
indeed.
All right. Well, I'll take it. I'm 48 years old now, so I'll take it any way I can get it.
You know, don't look a day over 30.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's that gym exercise, I tell you, it makes you look great.
I appreciate it. So I guess I'll do my little intro. So I'm mostly, I've got my own channel under my name, Troy Leavitt, and I've been developing video games since about 1995 professionally. Been on a sabbatical for the last year or so. And on my channel, I've been talking a lot about primarily video games and feminism, but also some stuff about religion and social justice and various other issues where they kind of intersect with video games. Talked a bit about Gamergate and things like that. And that's how I came to know Q here, is through our discussions where we've been talking for the last few weeks. We found that we had a lot of overlap, and so here we are, starting in on these discussions about various social issues and fun and exciting topics, and we'll see where it goes.
Indeed. Hopefully it won't cause too much of a stir. Well, enough, hopefully, to give us a bit more exposure, especially in my case, as I am but a small little ant. I wanted to start this little discussion off with, well, something that some people are going to probably find a subject that's been somewhat beaten to death, but hopefully myself and Mr. Leavitt can bring a interesting perspective on it, which is that of MGTOW. For my own money, I believe that MGTOW is largely a good thing. I think that men are reacting sensibly to essentially a hostile society that sees them as nothing more than a disposable cog, and indeed to women who are becoming increasingly hostile themselves and increasingly demanding and willing to not give anything in return but demand everything. However, slowly but surely, I have been noticing a metamorphosis in the MGTOW movement. One that has, and again, I know this is going to come across a bit predictable, but it is a concern. The MGTOW movement has been essentially metamorphosizing from having essentially a philosophical starting point of, I don't really need to worry about women. Validating my existence through women's approval is a bit of a mug's game, and tying myself up into something like marriage is ultimately a doomed deal. That is now slowly turning into these very broad terms which are being applied to everything, and what has itself started off as a going your own way has become a sort of a war cry, sort of a statement that has slowly but surely, a lot of repetition here, I know, so I need to do a bit of cutting. Slowly but surely, gaining a very vicious edge to it. And my position is to offer a caution to young men and to ask them to say, hey, look, go your own way, by all means, but be wary of this sort of rhetoric, this sort of tone, and what you're doing, because you are creating a mythology within your movement, and you are creating this a dogma that is becoming more than just a passing resemblance to the much more radical strains of feminism. Troy, you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think you framed things up very well, and it's agrees very much with my own experience with the MGTOW movement. So I was married for 20 years,
Hmm.
and I had two children. I went through a divorce, and that divorce was expensive for me. I'll just throw out the number. I believe it cost me about $250,000
Jesus.
to get through all that. So it was pretty heavy, and painful. So and that's kind of so I agree very much with the dangers that are expressed by the MGTOW movement and by some men's rights advocates, and there's been kind of a rift there too. But at the same time, as you've said, I've started to notice this sort of formulation of an echo chamber that a lot of the guys who are in the movement who have self-identified as MGTOW men are reinforcing themselves into this position of extremism where it feels to me they're starting to make some mistakes in their logic and their errors of judgment. Actually, this is kind of relevant to the James Damore, Google memo.
Yep.
And I think he did this really brilliant thing. And then I thought, this is exactly what MGTOW's doing. So in there, he's got, some bell curves, right?
Hmm.
And these bell curves, he notes, they overlap between men and women. And the overlap is very, very large. And he says should be opposed, or we should make the distinction between that and where we take just the medians of these two positions and say that represents the entire sex, either male or female, as a single bar line. I don't know, maybe you could actually find that from the memo. But I thought, yes, this is exactly what I see in the MGTOW movement, is that they have started to use generalizations about men and women's tendencies as though they were absolutes and universals.
Yeah.
That all women are this way, all men are that way, and it polarizes things. It turns things into, like I think you said, sort of this mythology of where men are and where women are in society. And I think that's harmful because it's no longer treating men and women as individuals who may have tendencies but exist on a spectrum. It's putting them into these buckets, and especially if you're MGTOW, I see why they do that, because it becomes self-reinforcing. It becomes that sort of, all women are this way, all women are bad.
Right. Yeah.
And it creates a real problem. And I think it's unfair to especially young men to start to view the world through those filters. It becomes like religion.
Yeah, absolutely. And no, I mean, I think we're both in agreement on that statement. I mean, what I constantly see, and originally I do think I should point out that when MGTOW was first starting out, people understood that they were just talking in a general sense, the difference between a universal principle versus a general principle. A universal principle being something like every human needs to breathe, every human needs to eat, whereas a general being, most humans prefer meat, or generally speaking, men prefer red meat over white, something like that. But within MGTOW, I am seeing that nowadays a lot of talking points, a lot of articles seem to be just wanting to reinforce bullet points such as all women are gold diggers, all women are irrational and cannot be reasoned with, all women will divorce you, despite the fact that 50% of marriages do actually stay together. So already that sort of puts again, 50% is still 50%, but
right
at the same time, it's no way near this idea that this tiny percentage of marriages stick together. Like only 5% of marriages stick together, and all the others are crushed. And it's all because of blood-sucking harlot women. No, it is an even split, and there are people who understand that they're not in the perfect situation, but they try to make it work. And they do understand that there is a need to come together and to work on it together through thick and thin. And believe it or not, there are probably more women out there than a lot of MGTOW men want to acknowledge. But again, that's not good for the new echo chamber. So it's just simply a blanket statement: all women will divorce you, and then all women will emotionally manipulate you. All women are liars. All women are arrogant. And then this one is being increasingly emerging, which is men are the superior sex. And
right
as I said to you as I sent you in my sort of very brief notes, there is basically what has become almost a pivotal, almost like the foundation of which they sort of base a lot of their new mythology on, which is, where did I put it here? Summarize. Yeah, here we are. Creating a yeah. So yeah, the mythology can be basically summarized in the following statement: men, benevolent, selfless beings, build, maintain a society because they love women so much. Women, if unchecked, destroy everything that is built because they are irrational, emotional sluts.
Yeah, I think that encapsulates almost the central dogma of the MGTOW movement.
Right. I think we should. I think I should stress though that's only within a certain strand. But why the problem is I'm seeing that strand is becoming increasingly dominant. As much as I like the work of people like Human and people like Thinking Ape and is it Coltrane? I think it is. Is it Colton?
Coltrane, I think.
Yeah, Coltrane.
Yes. I like him too.
Yes. Yeah. Who take a much more sort of pragmatic approach to everything, and have a very much a sort of what's what I'm looking for here? Have very much
shaded or nuanced, right?
Well, no, not necessarily. Well, yeah, they do have a nuanced opinion, but have a much more of a sort of here is negative female behavior, but understand that this is just talking in a general parlance, and it's probably going to be more common, and just to be wary of it. And sometimes to blow raspberries at sort of foolish aspects of female behavior and sort of contradictory statements of I don't need a man, but I'm terribly lonely, so let me marry myself, as Human recently did the video one, which I thought was quite tragic but humorous as it was. But I'm also seeing in people like Sandman and Angry MGTOW and MGTOW 101 and Mayor of MGTOW and increasingly that there are basically men who feel spurned and are taking out their aggression on females by creating this idea that you're not good enough to have me, so I'm going to go my own way. And it's starting to come into videos that are completely unrelated. I was watching a video about the decline of Rick and Morty, and it was just some video some kid had made, young man had made, and he didn't present his argument particularly well, but I sort of got the beat of it. And then halfway through it, he goes on about women. And it's just this prolonged, minute and a half rant about how all women are gold-digging sluts and harlots. And I blinked, and I paused the video, and I thought, Jesus Christ, did I just walk into a MGTOW parody video or something?
Right, yeah, and I agree with you. I've seen it kind of proliferating out through the blogosphere, or whatever you want to call it, through different people who are writing these. One of the ones that I listen to a lot is Turd Flinging Monkey, who I think is a brilliant guy.
Oh yeah, I love his stuff as well.
I like his stuff too. But, I've seen exactly what you're talking about coming through a lot of his videos. For example, we'll just, hit on some things. He talks a lot about, the hypergamous instinct.
Yeah.
And how women are always trying to monkey branch their way up the chain to, better resources, a better male, that sort of stuff. And so you get the sense that at any moment, any woman is going to, just up and leave you for what she perceives as a better situation. That doesn't really reflect reality. I didn't know this at first, but I think that Turd Flinging Monkey comes from that position because he himself experienced it where I listened to an earlier one he did where he had a girlfriend who he said was not particularly attractive, maybe a little overweight or whatever, and thought that, that would make her safe, but then she lost some weight and became more attractive, got some confidence, and bailed on him for somebody else, is how I interpreted his own story. And I thought, so he's been burned, and so he sees that instance of what happened to him as a generalization for what all women want to do, and he's reinforced that. The thing is, the hypergamous instinct, I think is a genuine thing. Briffault's law, that, women interact with men primarily for their benefit, and if there's no benefit to be had, then no interaction takes place. That's kind of Briffault's law that they. So I think there's some genuine truth there. That being said, there's the counterfactuals. There are a lot of women, and I've seen it in my own life and my own experience, who will stay with men even though it's a negative position for them because they love and care for that man. I've seen, in two cases of my own family where a woman has stayed with her husband while he's been very sick. It's been very expensive to take care of him, and all the way, in one case, to that man's death. And it left her destitute, right? Mm-hmm. But she stayed with him, and she was not, chasing this hypergamous instinct to bail out. And I don't think this is a Nawalt case. I think that we have to be fair to women and say many women love their men and will stand by them through difficult times. They don't just all swing away. It's something that you should be aware of, could happen, and you should be smart and prepared for it, but you shouldn't plan on that being an absolute. And that's what I'm afraid is the message being sent to young men. Every woman's going to leave you. Every woman's going to run off the first opportunity she gets. I don't think that's the case. I don't think it's justified by the evidence.
No, and again, I'm in agreement with that. I don't quite understand where this sort of mentality really came from, where this just every single woman you meet, whether it be your sister, whether it be your mother, whether it be your aunt or your grandmother, or the girl you sort of bump into, that every single one of them is the exact same thing, because that sort of goes to this feminist idea that all women are basically this hive mind, that they all think the same way, they all want the same thing, and it doesn't just quite really pan out. I mean, you mentioned those examples of where women have stood by the men and been good women. People like Karen might point out the opposite of that, where women have acted in a bad way, and that's to be expected. But again, if it really was the case that all women were this one type, were this one, one size fits all, then why did we see things like with the Trump election that I think it was 51% of white women voted for Trump, didn't they?
Right. Yeah. I'm not sure of the exact demographics, but you do a sizable number definitely voted for Trump. Yes. Right. A very significant, perhaps election swinging amount. Yeah. Right. Voted for Trump.
And again,
and that's a wonderful point that you bring up, because you're hearing a lot in certain aspects of the MGTOW community right now. We need to take away women's right to vote, because they vote as a block and they vote solely in their best interests. And so, civilization is doomed because women are going to just vote for an ever-increasing welfare state. And I see why they believe that, but I don't think the evidence supports that. I think that women do vote their conscience, and women who are in stable relationships with their men, and let's assume, that 50% of marriages stick together, will not vote in favor necessarily of an increased welfare state. And so you have to look at the data for real and not just something that reinforces your ideological standpoint. And you pointed out exactly what I think is a good point, that there are women who will vote for smaller government. There are women who will vote for a decreased welfare state. There are women who have certain, more libertarian leanings, more conservative leanings, and they should not be discounted as anomalous. I think that there's, I think there's value in women having the vote, in other words.
No, I quite agree with that. And again, I was to that point as well, which is, there are also men who vote for big government, who vote for things like social programs as well. So you can't just put this at the feet of one person. It also sort of irks me a little bit where I see, a woman in a high position in a job, she fucks up, she makes a mistake, and then suddenly she must be now accountable for not just her mistake, but all women. So she's now become the representation of all women in that same field, in that same workplace, and it's somehow used as an example of, see, this is why women shouldn't be in this area, shouldn't be in this, field. And I don't think that's fair, because it's, everyone's prone to making mistakes. I mean, when a man makes a mistake, he isn't held up as an example of, you must, now account for the entirety of the sex, although rather, I must confess, that's not entirely true. Now I think about it.
Not anymore. But I hear what you're saying. That, within that ideological echo chamber of that certain segment of MGTOW, that they're very vigilant for some woman to screw up somewhere, and when she does, it's like, look, all women. Look how they screw these things up as CEOs or whatever.
No. But again, I do think we are getting a little bit too falling into sort of a trap ourselves. I do think it is worth remembering that a lot of their points, even when they really go off kilter, they're not entirely baseless. They actually are sort of grounded in some fundamental points, and there actually is some truth to it. For example, generally speaking, yes, women are more emotionally prone and are more likely to think with and sort of use their emotions as their way of dealing with issues and indeed processing needs and wants. And yes, women are, when looking for a partner, they are going to be focusing more on resources than necessarily companionship. And they will stack things differently because, of course, men and women are different. There's nothing wrong with admitting that. But I think really with MGTOW, while they do have a very good case, and I do think also it is very much a point that MGTOW should take pride in, even people who've been very vehemently against them, once they've actually taken a moment, those critics have taken a moment to actually look at the lay of the land, they've had to hold their hands up and say, actually, these guys do have a point. Jordan Peterson, for example, he said that MGTOW were weasels. And then,
right, pathetic weasels. I remember that.
Yes, and then he walked back from that. I believe both on the Dave Rubin report and also there's a clip on YouTube where they ask him if there was a statement you could take back, or you said something you wish you hadn't said, or would it be? And then Jordan, very humbly, I have to say, admitted that it was what he said about MGTOW was off kilter, and that when you look at the sort of the legal system, you look at the just the way everything is sort of skewed against men in society, what sane man would actually want to step on that minefield? I believe John the Other makes that comparison. Marriage is like a minefield. Yes, you could get through it, but why would you want to take the risk?
Right, and I completely agree, and that there seems to be this polarization that happens where it's all or nothing, but I believe there is a middle ground, and I don't really see this being advocated within MGTOW or even in some aspects of the MRA, that I think you can have a productive relationship at an individual level with a woman, but I think that you need to be illuminated by the red pill in order to arrive at that happy, fun, good, positive relationship. I think I talked about this before when we were speaking, that my whole philosophy of relationships boils down to like one phrase where I'm like, is it better for us both?
Mm.
And if you can keep your relationship in that position, which requires some nurturing and some vigilance itself, then I think you're in a good relationship. When you're like, oh, this relationship is good for me and it's good for her. It's better for us both. So it's positive. Let's continue and, continue to grow and invest in the relationship. But it's good to be red pill aware so that you can be wary of instances where, say, a woman may try to incline you towards doing or being somebody you don't want to be.
Right. Yeah.
And then I think that's where it's valuable to be aware of those warning signs that you're getting wrapped up in something that doesn't feel right to you or it's going to take away. And then you should, correct the situation.
Right, exactly. And I think that is what MGTOW was originally. It did very much start off as, older men talking about their experiences, admittedly negative experiences, but what it did was it illuminated a lot of younger guys to potential dangers. And from that, guys were given knowledge and armed with that knowledge, rather than just sort of blindly walking out onto the battlefield. They were allowed to have some line of defense. Now, unfortunately, they've taken that defense and they've made it into an armor, an impenetrable armor, and they won't let anyone get near them, even if it is potentially somebody who is very friendly. And I find it desperately sad, not just for women, but also for men, that there's been a real breakdown of the sexes, a real breakdown of people wanting to get together and wanting to exchange ideas and actually wanting to better themselves and grow as individuals, both emotionally and mentally. Because that does happen. You do take those commitments on, you do take those responsibilities on. But again, it does come back to this point, which is, at least in the modern parlance, it's very, very hard. Because how do you even get around to pair bonding now? I mean, for goodness sake, if you look at what's going on in university campuses,
right, yeah.
I mean, you look at university campuses, any guy could be potentially just labelled a rapist and have their lives entirely destroyed, and the woman will usually get away with it. I think it's one of the biggest problems I see, and this really comes back to a point, which is there really are just no standards for women anymore. We just don't hold them accountable for their actions. We don't hold them accountable for consequence, except for when they're old and alone, in which case we let them, what's the term I believe Redonculus uses? OPAF. Was it?
Right. Was it old, poor, and powerless? Right.
Yeah,
Terrence Pop.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, old, poor, and powerless. In which case we don't care. And you can sit there and sort of laugh at the Schadenfreude of that, but at the same time, I have to wonder how many of those young ladies were sold a lie, in essence, and but
right. From their perspective, they're being ideologically indoctrinated too to this notion that men are predatory, that men take advantage of them. And so they feel like, and I believe that, they feel like they're red pilled to say, oh, look how men are out to get you. And they're trying to put you in a position of slavery. And so,
well, no, perpetual fear, but
they just want to use you for sex anyway, right?
yeah, no, yeah, it's a sense of perpetual fear. But no, the point I was actually raising originally before I went slightly off track there was because we don't hold women accountable when they do misconduct, or rather society doesn't in the way it once did, and we've sort of really slackened on holding those people accountable for their bad actions. We've in essence given women free rein to have no consequence. So this manifests itself in some really nasty ways, and as a result, you've got a situation where somebody has all the rights and none of the responsibility, as opposed to somebody who has no right but all the responsibility in the case of men and women. So I mean, look at Mattress Girl, Anne Solchwich.
Yes,
she was
Emma Solkowitz.
Yes, lied, destroyed this man's life, and yet no negative fallout whatsoever. There are some girls who said pretty little liar. There are some girls who sneer at her as well, but most of society is, and particularly feminists, because it's not really about trying to bring the sexes together. It's not really about equality. It is simply about divide and conquer. And unfortunately, MGTOW is also sort of cut from that same cloth. But rather, whereas it's sort of from the same. It is from the same cloth, though it's a different sort of fabric, I suppose.
Yeah, that Emma Solkowitz story is a brilliant example of what we see in society right now, because Emma Solkowitz made what was a false accusation, right? And as you look into it, you see that, yes, she basically was trying to enact some sort of revenge or retribution against a boy who really wasn't that into her, but who she had been having, sex with.
She was into him, wasn't she? And then she
was into him.
He spurned her, and then she basically went crazy girlfriend on him.
Exactly.
Crazy ex-girlfriend.
And all the evidence supports that position.
Right.
But then, so she makes this accusation. She gets held up as, this standard of a brave woman. And then it comes out that, she lied. And this is where I think you're right, that it turns into she doesn't end up taking responsibility for that false accusation, but the institution does. Because, his family went back and sued the school where this happened. I don't remember what it was right now. And they won. They were able to get some damages for him. But the institution is the one that paid the price. So the institution so did the against her false accusations.
Yeah, so did the actual boy as well, who was wrongly accused, because he was branded, and that's going to be stuck with him for the rest of his life, even though he was completely innent.
Right, even though he was exonerated by any stretch. But you're right. He's paying the price for her false accusation. The institution is paying the price for her false accusation. She apparently is paying very little price and has actually got a lot of fame and
success
for her bravery.
For basically a lie. But no, it's worse than that though as well, because this isn't even just an isolated incident. We had the Druk Lacrosse case. That was a Rolling Stone article, and again, time and time again, when you had these false rape accusations coming up, there was also the football team as well, and there's also the I know there was actually a football case where there something legitimately did happen, but you also had the example of the. This is going back a little bit, but there was the cab driver who picked up some drunken women who take them home. They didn't have any money, and they were going to call the police and claim that he sexually assaulted them. Now, thankfully, in his car, he had a camera running which showed that he didn't do anything of the sort, and that the girls were just blind drunk. So they go scot-free. The police don't do anything. They don't cuff them or take them to court, and of course the girls magnanimously decided not to press charges, surprisingly. And again, here's an example of women behaving incredibly badly, and they don't even get a slap on the wrist. We see there's also the situations where we have, and probably quite hilariously, I'm going to bring this back to something else, but where you have like women in schools and education system who prey on men, and there's not really much of an uproar about it. I mean, Turtling Monkey brought up a situation where you had prison officers sexually abusing.
Oh, that's right. I saw that.
Yeah, young men. No one gives a shit. You had the situation that Helen Port brought up recently, which was a woman killed both her twins because she had to have shared custody with the husband. No mainstream coverage. Now, going back to the teacher incident, there was, of course, that very famous incident where there was the teacher who had the affair with the 13-year-old boy, I believe. And interestingly enough, Bill Maher, when he was when he was starting off his show, he had some of his little guests on, and he even stated that this woman did not conform to the American family and that her only crime was she fell in love which is hilarious when you think about it, because he was actually supporting. Maybe he didn't know all of his stories, but it's interesting how we go out of our way to excuse women's behavior, and we always show, we put it in romantic terms, don't we? And hell, because, guys are always up for it. There's no emotional destruction for them. No, sir, not at all. I mean, that gag in South Park, when it's the when is it little teacher bangs student or bangs baby, and all the police officers are getting ready, like, yeah, come on, get the dirty pervert. And they're, no, it's my female teacher. Your female teacher? Yeah. Nice.
Right.
Yeah. Right. They do that.
I remember that episode
right.
too.
And it does show
double standard.
It does show the complete double standard. And again, it's this absurdity to me, which is, again, going back to the sort of absurdity of feminism, which is, it has this, we want to be treated equally, except for when it's not advantageous to us. So again, we want all the positives and none of the responsibility. And again, it's sort of hard to not sympathize with MGTOW, and it's sort of hard not to sort of get men's position and get men's points and see that there actually is, a fair argument to be made here. But despite all of that, and again, let me just say, I know I've sort of been fumbling all over the place with this first time, so, cut me some slack. I don't want any MGTOW potentially listening to this, thinking that I'm trying to shame you into going back and, getting nice with women. No. Do what makes you happy. Do the things that make you feel fulfilled. I've read countless stories about young men who, once they stopped sort of seeking the constant adulation of women and focusing on what the things that made them feel complete and happy, built a much richer, better life. But don't close yourself off to the possibility of generally meeting a nice girl among that as well, and always be open to it, always be open to that experience, because the fact of the matter is, not all of them are going to be your harlots, not all of them are going to be gold diggers. There's potential they can be that, absolutely. And again, she's going to have to, if she's worth it, she'll understand your position and maybe try to work with you. Look what Karen did. I mean, Karen's discussed the story about her own current partner, and she took her
This is Karen Strawn, right?
Yes, Girl Writes What.
Yes.
It took her 3 years to convince him that she wasn't going to leave him destitute. She wasn't going to tear his heart out. You're in a relationship right now with a nice girl. And I think there is actually a term for this, which is guys who have taken the red pill but aren't prepared to completely cut women out and do sort of look at the value that women do bring to society. I believe that term is called the purple pill, or the
purple pill, yeah.
Purple pill.
And I find myself advocating, hey, there might be value in this purple pill analogy, that you recognize all the red pill things, you're well informed on it, but you can also see that there's value when properly kind of constrained in some traditionalist notions of how a relationship can work. And you can actually, in a way, it's an add-on, right? Like if you're living your life for yourself, if you're living your life aware, that wouldn't it be nice to include a woman in your life who is treating you well and that it's better for you both? Well, then I think most men, even MGTOW men, would probably say, yeah, that would be great, but they just don't, they don't believe that these women exist. And I say, well, that may be because you're trapped in your ideological echo chamber and refuse to accept that they might exist. You get into the notion of unicorns in the waltz where they think that they're so rare that, that it's not even worth looking for them. I'm like, well, I actually think, and this may be my own perspective, so I'm 48 years old, so I'm in a different position than a lot of the young men. But, I have not had difficulty dating, at 48 years old. All I do is put up a profile and I get a lot of contact. So it may be my own perspective, but I think that speaking to younger men, you can say, you don't have to close yourself off. You don't have to see things in black and white. There are shades of gray here. There is value between the red and the blue pill. This purple pill may be a real thing.
I think that also not to press on this, but what sort of women, sort of age bracket do you date with, if you don't mind me asking?
I actually tend to date pretty close to my own age.
Yeah.
And I found from my experience that, there is the opportunity to date very young women if you want to, but I don't find enough in common with really young women that they're too flighty, too,
Which is, I think that's kind of interesting thing though, because for a lot of young men who are trying to get on with young women, that's not going to happen because they haven't had the chance to establish themselves, gain resources, and gain the ability to distinguish themselves. They are, for lack of a better term, just another cog. They're not a special kind of cog or piston. They're just miscellaneous. So it's very hard for them. So when they do try to, engage with women, they are spurned, and they are then, they then come across MGTOW, they then come across the sort of strain of people like Sandman and people like, TFM and all of that. And they say something that does massage a bit of the ego, and it does also make men feel good about themselves, and it also does sort of slightly fetishize, their perceived, wrongness about how society treats them. And through that, it sort of puts these young men in almost a perpetual red pill rage state. And that's what I think has given rise to this kind of sort of cult-like mentality that's becoming a much more vehement strain. And again, people can sit there and maybe roll their eyes and say, oh, we've heard criticism before. And I agree with you. Back when this was all starting up, say back in 2013, 14, 15, you looked at sort of like, say, commentaries and things like that. It was mostly people just being quite philosophical about this. You got the occasional sort of vehement comment that was all, oh, women are just halt and just, just extractors and just stupid little girls and babies and children. But now that's becoming so much more prevalent in the comment section, and it's nearly, in some cases, every other comment, or they have the highest voting counts and they have the highest. So that is starting to take hold. And if you seriously believe that your philosophy can't be tainted and can't itself become, its own organization, own group, you are deeply mistaken. It happens so quickly and so readily. You've even got tiers within MGTOW, such as MGTOW monks, for example, who have sworn completely off women and almost have a state of celibacy on themselves. I believe that's what Sandman comes himself. And there's also this is the part of MGTOW I don't really want to, I think we have to discuss it in honesty, which is, what's the end goal? What is the end game? Because the fact of the matter is, people like Sandman seem to have this pie in the sky philosophy that the second, we come up with sex robots and artificial wounds, then suddenly it's going to just magically make everything better and won't complicate things at all. No, it's not. And there's, again, a lot of MGTOW seem to believe that this is
right. Well, I think you've touched on something that I've seen in certain aspects of the movement. TFM is in there too, where they've actually reduced women down almost entirely to their sexual function, right?
Right.
They get into the sexual dimorphism, so it's all about sex, and it's all about, women provide sex for men, men provide resources for women, and they look at it through this biological lens, which is an absolutist biological lens, doesn't take. I would
like to point out there that again, I get what they're coming from, and again, the position they actually have there is one of basically cold rationalism. What is the function of all living creatures? Is to reproduce, and so let's look at it. Let's look at our sort of sexual currency, and there is a logic in that, but it isn't. It's a foundation, but it isn't what who's happy with a house that just has a foundation. You need a foundation, then you need the walls, you need the ceiling, and everything else. And that's kind of the problem. They seem to have just got the foundation down, but no house. Continue.
Yeah, no, I am in complete agreement with what you're saying, and I'm going to use an example again from TFM because I watch him a lot.
Yeah, he's great.
So, he's spoken a lot about women's value being primarily their sexual value, and then what I found interesting is fairly recently, I don't know if you've been watching him very much, but in the last couple months he got a sex doll. Right? He was gifted with a sex doll, or maybe he bought it. I don't know.
Oh, this is Seri, isn't it?
Celestina.
Celestina, yeah.
And what's interesting to me about this is he seems like there's almost this moment of purple in him, where he's going, I recognized that as I was, having these affectionate moments with my new sex doll, that I kind of missed the just the simple affection of having somebody there, somebody to put my arm around, somebody to, to feel like I'm connected with. And I'm like, aha, see, there's more to your relationship than just the sexual release part, which I think we put, certain aspects of MGTOW put way too much emphasis on.
Absolutely.
That biological relationship, that there are value in having somebody else who you can relate to at an emotional level, at a level that's more than purely sexual and physical.
It's a bond. I mean, humans do bond, both of them.
Right.
Both of them do have that bonding agent, and both of them do have the ability to, come together. And again, I did notice that myself, and I sort of smiled at it. And indeed, both Human and Thinking Ape just touched upon this very briefly when they had their wonderful conversation, which I highly recommend everyone listen to, which was, if it really was a case of just sexual release and there's no other function to it, then what's wrong with just jacking off? What's wrong with just, queuing up some porn and, knocking one out? So
Right.
that doesn't work. Yeah, this is why also you look at sort of prostitutes and things like that. They offer the girlfriend experience, which is the hugging and the kissing and the stroking of the hair and things like that. So that suggests to me that there is actually a much more deeper component to this than just a simple case of arrive, dump seed, leave,
Right.
or pump and dump as is lovingly referred to. I've also another aspect of MGTOW I do challenge is this idea that women can never truly love you.
Right, and I think you're right, and there's evidence to support this. It's not just a framework that you want to have. You can look like I've given examples that women will stand by their men. Some women will, many of them will, through difficult times. That they genuinely will love their men. And in the MGTOW community, that subset that's really extreme, they seem to act like, no, this never happens. Women are incapable of the deeper love, and I'm like. Have you seen a woman stand by a cancer patient all the way to death, even though she stands not to gain any money? In fact, I'm like, this happens, and it happens a lot. So I think it's very unfair to act as though that all women are a certain way and that they're all predatory in nature. Even though I understand, and I want to say what you said earlier, just so that people don't think that I'm, advocating for some sort of return to traditionalism and blue pilling. I think that guys who are in MGTOW have made a rational decision based on the risk to reward evaluation that they see, right? Mm-hmm. That they've looked at the world and they said, this is too risky. I don't want to take that risk. It's not worth the reward. So I'm not saying they should come back to the plantation or anything like that.
Oh,
it's their choice if they're happy being there. But I think it's worthwhile to be aware of the complexities and the nuances of the situation to say, well, you shouldn't necessarily close yourself off in the interest of your own happiness, right?
No, absolutely.
If you do and you feel like you're happy with your sex doll or whatever, fine, that's okay. But be careful that you're advocating that your own version of happiness is now right for everybody else too.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, as the old saying goes, only sifts steal in absolutes. And
right.
yeah, no. I think that really is the strength of MGTOW. But another thing I do think has to be acknowledged here is there is some frustration that a lot of MGTOW do feel, and a lot of MRAs and men in general, which is the only time we're allowed to really talk about these issues, and the only time these issues that they raise about, like unfair divorce settlements, bad jobs, discrimination, and always being put as a predatory, agent, always being put as something that is by de facto just wrong and shouldn't exist. Only time anyone's ever willing to talk about it is when a woman brings it up. Dr. Helen Smith, of course, Karen herself, and most recently with Cassie J and the Red Pill, which was excellent, by the way.
Yes, I really appreciate that movie. I don't think she got all her facts quite right, but I was really glad to see that movie released.
Oh no, absolutely, and I think it was very beneficial. And yeah, I think there were a few things she was off kilter with slightly, and she still framed it in a way that I would have liked to have got a bit more into certain aspects. But honestly, it was better than I was imagining it was going to be, and there was
Me too. She sparked the right conversation.
She did, absolutely, and I think she handled it in a way that it was approachable for women, and that's the important thing here, because realistically, this isn't going to change with men. This is what a lot of pickup artists and MGTOW sort of argue, which is you can never argue with the system because the system is gynocentric and is geared entirely towards women at the expense of men. And again, certainly more credence to that than the feminist mythology of patriarchy. But nevertheless, if you do get women coming over to your side and actually being sympathetic to the plight, and again, more often than not they will once it negatively affects somebody they love. They'll be sort of sit there and sort of nod in reverence about how men are evil predatories, or how men are just interested in sex, until it's their brother or their husband or their uncle who's wrongly accused. In which case they're like, well, hold on a second, that's not right. And then they'll start to see the skewered system themselves. But the point is, they will wake up and they will see that, and we do need women to sort of have that. I mean, the point I'm trying to get to, I guess, in sort of a laborious way, is that there's nothing to gain from spurning women, and when women do want to try and change, it's a rare occurrence, but when it does happen, you just having this idea of them, which is just as misguided as feminist preconceptions of men, it's only going to incentivize them to not change. It's just going to be like, well, fuck it, the system is geared towards me. And even though I've come here with my hand on my heart and I'm trying to change and trying to hear what your concerns are, and you can just bite my head off, what's the point?
Yeah, I totally agree. So I've sometimes thought about how silly this must look if we could imagine like an alien being coming down and looking at, the species of humans and how they're tearing each other apart ideologically along their sex lines here, like the men versus women. It's been going on for quite some time. I'm isn't it ridiculous? That we should be working towards bettering our species and trying to achieve higher goals. Instead, we get lost in these ideological echo chambers of who has it worse and who's going to tear each other down. And I'm like, it seems from that perspective to look pretty silly. I would much rather have a conversation where we acknowledge on both sides that there are issues that we can address and that we can work towards them. And this is why, so I've been asked this, are you an anti-feminist? Are you a feminist, Troy? And I say, well, what do you mean by feminism?
Right.
Because different people mean different things. And if you talk like, say, Camille Paglia or Christina Hoff Sommers, I'll say, that brand of feminism is appealing to me. That a lot of the MGTOW guys will say, oh no, they're just pretending or whatever. But I'm like, no, Camille Paglia is a lesbian, and has openly been so, and she's been advocating for, women who are asking for additional rights, additional opportunities, have to take on the responsibilities associated with it. And I totally agree with that. She's got that really famous quote that she said, we were fighting in the 60s for the right to risk rape. That she wanted the opportunity to get out and be a master of her own destiny, and that women used to be pushing for this. Let us be, able to go out into the world and take on some risks, but also to take on the responsibilities associated with those, additional rights and responsibilities. And I'm like, that's great. That brand of feminism we need more of. But we don't hear much about it. It's all been washed under, or not all of it, but most of it's been washed into this women are victimized narrative that I think MGTOW is responding to, and I think, quite rationally responding to for the most part, but they're just taking it too far.
Yeah, and indeed, they themselves are beginning to metamorphosize into that very,
they're like the mirror image. It's like Bizarro.
Yeah, two sides of the same
Superman
coin.
and Bizarro Man or whatever.
I would like to just touch upon something else you mentioned, which was the idea of women's agency and women taking their own destiny into their own hands. This is one of the reasons why I don't agree with the conclusion that some of the more extreme strands of MGTOW bring up, which is, let's just take away women's vote because women are incapable of being responsible to think for themselves and cannot do anything for the benefit of society except for their own selfish needs. First of all, that's reflected on everybody. Everyone always votes for their own selfish needs, okay? It's a very small percentage of people who actually think about what's good for me, what's good for my neighbor, and then what's good for the broadness of society. But the fact of the matter is, I don't really want to live in a world, and you're probably going to roll your eyes and say, oh, yeah, I'm just being irrational, I'm not thinking responsibly here. But I don't live in a world where we essentially have a serfdom system, where because you were born a certain way, you are unafforded certain rights, so you're unafforded to pursue something. I mean, just take for a moment, just imagine I said we're going to take away homosexuals' rights to vote, or black people's right to vote, or white people's rights to vote because of the skin color, something they have absolutely no control over. It's an abhorrent idea. It's an absolutely abhorrent idea. So to take it away from women based on the fact that, well, you have a vagina, so it sucks to be you, it just doesn't really appeal to me at all. And again, it doesn't really hold any water to it. I'm very much of the belief that people should be allowed to be given equal opportunity to pursue their dreams. If they don't manage to succeed in those dreams, then maybe there was something wrong with them. Maybe they just didn't have the skill set, or maybe they just didn't apply themselves enough. But by trying to essentially artificially construct things, or indeed deny people something based on their gender, it's just as bad as, well, as I mentioned, giving it to them because of their gender.
Yes, I agree. So what you just touched on there reminds me of a book that I'm reading right now. It's Thomas Sowell, the economist Thomas Sowell, who I adore. I think he's brilliant.
Do you know, I have his books. I haven't got around to actually reading them yet. I've watched him on YouTube like many people, and I thought, right, I need to buy this guy's books, and I did, but never got around to reading them yet. Bad me. Continue.
Well, the book I'm reading is called The Quest for Cosmic Justice. And he wrote it, I think it's 1999, so he wrote it a while back, but he also points out that he spent many years, formulating his ideas and working on it. But at the essence, and I'm just going to try and boil this down very simply to how I understand what he's saying. At the essence, he says, seeking justice is something we all want. But the mistake that is made is that what we need for justice to be served, we need a process that is blind, that's
Yeah.
Lady Justice or whatever, holding up the scales of justice, that's blind to the income, so that it's the process that brings you about justice. And he uses the example of, if somebody goes on trial and then they go through the whole, rigmarole of through the court and everything, and hopefully whatever the outcome is, whether that person is found innocent or guilty, we'll say, well, justice was done if the process was fair and appropriate, right?
Right.
That's how we determine it. But what he says, we make this mistake is we look only at the outcome of the process, whatever that process might be, and then look for disparities there and start to assume that there's something wrong with the process itself because the outcome. So they're looking for equality of outcome when they're seeking social justice rather than equality of process. And so he's making, I think, a very strong case that we should be focusing on, are there places in our society where the process is bad? Well, then we can work on that to, seek social justice or cosmic justice. But we also have to recognize that there are going to be different starting places, different races, different, positions that people are going to start, like you said, from all over the spectrum. As long as the process of opportunity is fair, as long as, the court system or whatever you want to call it is reasonably fair, then we can say that, we have a just society. But if we're looking at it from the back end, if we're looking at it from we see disparities when we divide things up along these intersectional divisions, and, Asians make more than blacks, so we're going to have to put a tax on Asians and feed it to the blacks or something. Well, now you've totally blown it, because you're no longer looking at the process. You're looking at the outcome and not accounting for everything that's gone on in between, everything from the starting position through the entire process of culture and the rest. And it's gonna wreck the notion of justice, because you're going to try and give people special providence in order to try and equalize the outcome.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Did I explain that?
No, you did. No, you did. Absolutely. And I think that's something that I think is really the fundamental problem with a lot of modern day world, which is you see a problem, and rather than acknowledging how we got that problem about, you try to artificially correct it by saying, well, you've got a glass of milk, but you haven't, so I'm going to take your glass of milk, cut it in half, and give half to this person.
And the reason the first person got the glass of milk is because they went to the fridge and they poured it themselves,
yeah,
right? And the other guy could go to do the same thing, but no.
No, exactly.
That's injustice. Right?
Yeah, exactly. That's walking is hard, and you've got to lift the fridge, and you've got to get the milk out, and that's cold. It's a lot of steps there, a lot of steps.
So unfair.
Indeed. We're putting it in somewhat simplistic terms. I'm reminded actually briefly of a test that was done, which was they were this is basically show that there was discriminatory practices in school against young boys, and what they did was they gave teachers tests, and they had the child's name on top of it. And what they found was if it was a boy's name, then the teacher marked it much harshly than it would if it was a girl's name. So what they ended up doing was they just gave them sheets with no names on it. So just what the answers were and how they'd sort of solved it. And so the teachers then signed it all off. And what they discovered was that the boys scored higher than the girls. Now, what was interesting is I've sort of taken that experiment in my head and sort of processed it and thought to myself, now, what if we were to apply that to, say, things like justice processes? So you wouldn't even gender the perpetrator and the victim. You would simply sit there and say victim one, they had the victim here and the potential, the accused, and use gender-neutral terms, and indeed anything that could potentially remove a bias. So, right. For example, if they see, if let's just say there's a case where a man has been beaten by his wife, and they see the court case and they see this sort of big burly man, and they see this kind of like little small blonde woman, and they think to themselves, maybe a male on the jury is like, oh, there's no way she could have possibly done that, because his own instincts is to immediately find, to want to defend her because she seems small and so scared, and that husband's big and brutish and burly. And so there will be that barrier there. I've always wondered if perhaps, and maybe I'm completely off kilter here, but I've always wondered that if maybe we remove that function and it was just, here are the facts, but with no real discerning features, so you can't see what the person's race is or their age or their color. It's just, here are the facts of what we know of the case, here's the information, and you have to do it purely on this data with no other factors, what would our processing be like? I suspect we'd probably start seeing a much more equal distribution.
I think you're exactly right. So I have a little bit of experience with this in hiring at Disney.
Oh, really? Go ahead.
Well, one of the things that Disney did, to their credit, is that when we were hiring for positions, we would often get a series of applicants or their resumes with the names by, any sort of identifying information removed, the gender, their race, any of that.
Yeah.
It's all removed. And so you'd only see their qualifications. And then, and that was kind of the first layer as it would come, across my desk and the desks of other people who were doing this sort of, screening process on who we were going to interview later. And what would happen is you go through and you pick, your top 4, 5 applicants. And then what would happen quite often in the game industry, at least in my little corner of it, was that you discover they were all male, right?
Yeah.
And often all white males. And that was not because we were selecting white men. It was because in our applicant pool, they just happened to be the ones through the process who were the most qualified. However, and I noticed this at Disney, and I suspect it happens other places, there would be a subsequent kind of criticism where somebody would say, oh, we've selected all white men. Well, we should throw in 1 or 2 of these other, women or minority positions in at least through our interview process, just to make it look like we're rounding things out. Right. And you end up getting that sinking feeling like, well, the process is just, but because we didn't like the outcome, we're going to go and revise the process to try and change things. I suspect that microcosm of our hiring process applies all over the place, where they'll go through a process that they're trying to be blind in. Justice is trying to be blind, and then when they don't like the outcome, they're going to modify it. They're going to go back and rework it.
Absolutely. No, I think that is far too prevalent. And I do think that really is the big issue. Again, it reminds us of Rick and Morty. I think they had that criticism themselves. And what they did originally was everyone would write scripts, and then they just they thought the funniest scripts, and that's what they would animate. And it just turns out that more often than not, in fact, almost in every case, the funniest scripts and the best scripts were written by straight white men. And then, of course, that wasn't good enough, so they had to diversify and they had to hire women onto the project. And season 3, at least commonplace logic in the Rick and Morty community is that the quality has gone down. It's not as good as it used to be. And I do think some of that criticism stems from a case of it's a woman, and one woman writer has sort of shown tendencies of social justice, so we're just going to assume it's worse than it. Because I've looked at some of the forums, and some of their complaints seem a bit petty, and it really feels like you're trying to find something to complain about rather than something that actually is there. But at the same time, again, it's one of those situations where it's not without a case. There is a granite of truth to what they're saying. I think it's to see how it keeps playing out myself. But I keep hearing this is something that keeps coming up time and time again. When you do, because again, it opens up a lot of can of worms. It opens up the ideas of differences between sort of intelligence. I mean, that's how much of a taboo subject that is at the moment. So people want to always find other factors, because if you do take away any sort of markable traits, and it's just entirely based on the merit of the individual rather than anything other factors, then it does. I think it does show the gulf between the sexes, races, and things like that.
Yes.
And people find that very uncomfortable, and so they try to find ways to either maybe because they feel guilty, or maybe because they feel that maybe there was something wrong with the process. I don't see how you can really, but whatever.
Yeah, you touched on something, kind of bringing it back to MGTOW that I criticize, at least that aspect of the the extremist MGTOWs. I don't know what else we call them, but that they started to advocate for this. Well, men are smarter than women, right?
Yeah.
And they'll talk about it in absolute terms, and they'll even have this explanation of like, well, the tests kind of favor women so that they get a little higher, and men have higher cranial capacity. They have more room for brain cells or whatever. Oh, and that we see a lot of geniuses of men, but very few women. And I'm like, a lot of these things have their roots in truth, but when you look at the bell curves, when you look at everything's all added up, it even if there is a slight edge towards men being a little bit higher on certain tests, IQ tests or whatever, or we see more male geniuses or whatever, that does not mean that it applies universally to everyone.
Again,
that if you meet a woman on the street, there's a pretty good chance that if you're of average intelligence, that she is smarter than you,
Yeah.
that she'll test higher than you on the same test. It does not apply. And I've seen this in my own experience within the game industry, that you have many women who are absolutely fantastically brilliant. They're really good. And I think it's ridiculous to start to assume that it's all or nothing, and that men are smarter than women is one of those myths that gets under my skin.
And that's what it exactly is. Again, this part and parcel of the mythology, which is what MGTOW has been slowly cultivating itself recently, which has been one of the things that's been concerning me. Because again, it always comes back to this point of wanting to have women's validation, and because you haven't had women's validation, you feel spurned, and therefore you're trying to essentially give yourself an ego boost. And that to me seems to fly in the face of what MGTOW was, because you're still tying everything of your existence to women, rather than just saying, you know what, I don't care what you think, I don't care what I don't really care about you, you have a vagina, good for you. I'm going to do my thing. I'm going to go and do this instead because this is interesting to me. And again, I mean, I can point to guys like MGTOW Mafia, and is he still around? I'm not even sure anymore.
I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. But again, you just look at some of these channels, and there is very much this undercurrent of women don't deserve me. I sort of touched on that earlier in the conversation, but I do think it is worth bringing back. The thing about the intelligence, I think Teflon Mike did a video about that, where he talked about how the test, that men do have a double growth. So they have their first spurt at 13, which girls do, and then men go for a second transition, when they hit 30 or so. But to my understanding, women also go through a transition as well, which was actually, I hate to say this, but after giving birth, their brain sort of rewires itself differently. So I'd be kind of curious to see what that leads to, because that actually might account for why you get some women who are very driven and motivated, but the second they have a baby, then they become sort of disconnected.
Maternal.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. They become disconnected and become more interested in being the mother and being interested in staying at home. And I think there's some interesting ground to cover there. I guess what I want to say in closing, because we are running out of time now, is that I think this antagonistic, the sort of antagonistic approach that MGTOW is taking towards women is, in the long term, not helpful, and indeed is not going to do anything for both young men and for women. You're just going to spurn women who might generally want to try and change and generally want to try and get to know you, and at the same time, you're only going to give them validation for wanting to, fall into the arms of the radical feminists. Now, the flip side to that as well is that I think that men are right to see the fact that the situation is very much skewed against them, and it is smart of them to say, this is a hazard, I'm just going to walk away from it, and, live for yourself, do the things that make you happy. Don't be blaming everything on women, don't be blaming everything on society, because there is some accountability to you to also take on as well. This idea that, women should just love me for who I am. No. That's exactly what women say about men. Okay, there is responsibility for you to also do some changing and also do some compliance to attract a partner. If you don't want that, that's fine. As I said, do the things that make you happy. Just don't, go your own way. I don't care what women think. I don't care what women do. But don't hate them either. And don't blame them for everything. And for God's sake, when you look at these, be careful with your own rhetoric and tone as well. Because while I understand that a lot of MGTOW do just talk in a general sense and not a universal sense, and do understand that there are women who are fighting for men's causes. Again, I think of Karen, I think of Erin Pizzi, I think of, Dr. Helen Smith, I think of, Camilla Pollier, I think of people like, Christina Hoff Summers. I even think of people on YouTube, like, Shield wife, for example, and, individuals such as, Tara McCarthy. And Brave New World. And even Rage After Storm and all of that. And all people like Tree of Logic, and the list goes on. Aidan Paladin, Lauren Southern, Siobhan Head. It's a surprisingly extensive list, actually, of girls out there who are fighting for men and who are trying to, have your back and your corner.
Right, and I think they're changing the dialogue too. They're being successful. You know,
They are.
Cassie J got that movie. It was difficult, but there's a there seems to be this notion within the MGTOW movement that it's futile, right? We
Yeah.
shouldn't even talk about these issues. Just wait for civilization to collapse. And I'm like, yeah, but I actually think progress is being made. Some laws are changing. I'm seeing it in the court system with some of my friends who are going through divorces and that sort of stuff. And it's a fight, you know, there's no doubt about it that there, you know, it's a difficult position, but they are advocating for parental rights that are more blind, you know, that it's not just in the best interests of the children always mean women, you know, or always means the mother, that, you know, that I have seen evidence that courts are beginning to change, that there are, you know, reasons to be optimistic that maybe we can all purple pill
Yep.
and we can arrive at a place where, because I believe that even the most diehard MGTOW guy would say, well, if I could find my Newalt, if I could find my unicorn who treats me really well, then yes, that would be a benefit on top of, you know, my own happiness if I could have that addition. And I would say, well, just keep that in mind, that there is the opportunity that you might be able to be even happier than the red pill has made you if the opportunity arises. You know, don't close that door necessarily for your own sake, for your own happiness. That's kind of my position. But again, I'm an old guy. I'm 48 years old and been through a lot, and it may be easier for me at my position in life than say somebody who's, you know, 20 years younger than me.
Yeah, no, I do think there is that. I think that's probably going to be one of the main criticisms you'll probably get, which is young guys might go, well, it's different when you were growing up, Troy, as opposed to what we are now. And that is, again, that is a fair criticism to make. But that doesn't mean that the message doesn't stand. You know, there are young girls who are, you know, we see with Generation Z, who are rejecting a lot more of they're sort of seeing the sort of chaos left in their wake by SJWs and stuff, and they're becoming very conservative in their outlook and going back to traditionalism. So change is a-coming. Change is metamorphosizing. And again, I stand by that. I want to be optimistic about this, and I don't want to simply close down the doors and just completely shut down dialogue and completely say and cut all women out entirely. Yes, be wary. Yes, acknowledge the danger that is there. And this also applies to women as well in regards to some of the more dangerous aspects of men's behavior. So again, it isn't just a one-way street. But I guess this conversation has been a bit rambly on my part. I do apologize. This is my first time doing this. But again, you know, go your own way. But
yeah. So just one thing that you hit on that I think is maybe so. Just last night, and I don't know when you'll actually publish this, but you know, Ben Shapiro gave his talk at Berkeley. And one of the things he said that I was like, he's got a good point here, is that people will say, oh, the left is winning, you know, social justice is winning. And he's like, wait a minute, look at the last election. What happened? You know, there was pretty much a sweep where there was in the U.S., a lot of Republican candidates came in, you know, developed a Republican Congress. You know, Trump won the election. Republican governors picked up a lot of seats. He's like, so the message is getting out there, you know, this kind of conservative message. Not that I'm advocating for conservatism, but I've just agreed with what Shapiro was saying, was like, it's not that, you know, the conservative or these other positions are all 100% victimized. There is value in these ideological discussions that people will change their minds, and we can see evidence of it over time. So we don't have to necessarily completely buy out of the conversation.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the reasons why we're seeing such sort of strident changes in things like YouTube's policies and all of that is because they know that there is just changes that come in and that things are changing.
That's a brilliant insight.
And that is why they're so terrified, and that is why they're trying to stranglehold people. And that's, again, I think that's a good note to end on there, which is, look, if the fact of the matter is, MGTOW, if it really was completely hopeless, and I know some will never be content or will always want to sit there and just keep it a boys' club, and that's fine. Again, go your own way. But it's not as hopeless as you might think it is. And again, just be open. Just be open.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree. That's a good way to end.
Great. Well, thank you for joining me, Troy. I hope to do this again with you very soon. And do you want to give you the final word? Close it out, Troy.
Well, I don't know if I have a final word other than I agree with you. I think go your own way is the way to go, and that way could include a woman in your life, even if you're MGTOW.
Indeed. I will be linking some of my favorite MGTOW channels down below for you all to check out, among which including Coltane, Human, and of course Thinking Ape, and one of my personal favorite, Paul Proteus, who I don't think gets much love. Great guy. I love his stuff.